Hmm. Hello, this is ENG B76, I think. Hollywood genres and modernity, cinematic genres and modernity. Taping this Monday night, January 11, and I'll post it later tonight or tomorrow. The way we'll normally run things is that I normally will have an open classroom on Monday night, but it didn't make sense to have an open classroom before I had taped a lecture. So this coming Monday will be an open classroom, and I'll probably then have also recorded the second lecture. So not tonight, but next Monday there'll be an open classroom based on this lecture. And based on a viewing of It Happened One Night, 1934, directed by Frank Capra with Clark Gable. Accessing the movies is, at the very least, they're cheaply rented. Sometimes you can find a copy online. If you do, you can always email a link to me, leonardgary@hotmail.com. I'll put it on here for people as long as it's not full of ads and stuff. Otherwise, I know Google, YouTube, many streaming services offer cheap rentals, $2.99, $3.99, or buying it for $13.99, which is less than the price of a book, really. So we'll kind of do it that way as far as you're actually viewing the movie. So you don't have to have seen It Happened One Night for tonight. I'm going to be talking about modernity, genres, cinema, self-constructions, ideology, mythology, history. This is a very interrelated class. Probably the headline in terms of why does genre formation interest me so much is because genre formation is symptomatic of cultural tensions. So our first genre is going to be romance. Our second will be sort of gothic / horror, and our third will be the Western. And I may jump around a little bit, but I'm going to primarily introduce the Hollywood romance tonight. Genre is the anticipation of how a narrative is formed. So it's not necessarily about the content. In fact, the content of genre varies against a consistent background. So Pretty Woman is recognizable as a Hollywood romance. It Happened One Night is one of the earlier examples of the genre as it was rapidly developing. The genre of a love story is centuries old, and probably Shakespeare, something like Midsummer Night's Dream, is a prototype of the Hollywood romance. The star-crossed lovers, and in fact, that Shakespeare said, never did the course of true love run smooth, and that's a kind of baseline of Hollywood romance. They may meet cute, or cute meet, as it sometimes is called, but then they don't get along, or they don't. One of them does, one of them doesn't. There's all of these obstacles, problems, misunderstandings, and they're very important. Misunderstandings, because the way they misunderstand each other says a lot about love in modernity, a lot about what we want from love in modernity, why it's one of the most important affects. I was looking over love songs, and I'm going to introduce your first prompt for the discussion page, and I'll just mention it now in case some thoughts occur to you as you're listening to me. I'm going to ask you to find 2 love songs. They can be favorites of yours. And in one of the love songs, I want the theme to pretty much be about love's the best thing that ever happened to me. And then I want you to find another song where the basic theme is love is the worst thing that ever happened to me. And then in your prompt, in your 300-word response, and in total, this is going to be 20% of the final grade, but you'll be doing 12 of them, or 11 maybe, maybe even 10, but certainly 10. And it's 20% of your grade, so it's worth taking time with it. I'm simply going to ask you to talk about how is it possible that love can be both the best and the worst? What is it that we celebrate when we think we found it in love? What is it that that we mourn, if that's the right word, in love? How, so songs like "How Could You Mend a Broken Heart" is on one side of the line. And then a song like John Legend's "All of Me," more recently, seems to be of that perfection, or what I'm going to be calling hyper complementarity. So there's a strand of romance of it's celebrated. Your partner is somehow perfect. They are a part of you didn't even know perhaps that you were missing. Now that you have it, you can't imagine living without it. But then of course there's all those other songs where you're forced to live without it because there's a breakup, which we're told is hard to do, and there's lots of reasons for that. Janis Joplin's "Taken a Little Piece of My Heart" is one of the more raucous heartache songs, kind of bordering on masochistic. "Love is Toxic," Britney Spears has her song called "Toxic," and Robert Palmer has his song "Addicted to Love." You might as well face it, you're addicted to love. And with the famous video that accompanied it, where his background performers are all seem to be women who are vampires with blood red lips. So the idea of love draining you, destroying you, causing you to give everything away. So there's lots of songs about "I gave it all away," and there's even there's songs about something like Sting's "Every Step You Take" is a strange song. It's because it seems like the most ardent romance. Every step you take, every move you make, I'll be watching you. But then when you hear yourself say that, you're like, wasn't this a stalker? And I think Sting kind of admitted as much, that this is one-sided obsessive love, where the one person decides the other person completes them, the other person doesn't agree, and it doesn't matter. This is the essence of stalking. But the only difference between a stalker and the love of your life is how you feel about them. I mean, say what you will about stalkers, they're very ardent lovers, or they seem to be. The problem is that their claims that they love you, it's not you they love. It's an idea of you that they've kind of hijacked that doesn't even correspond to ways that you see yourself. But they won't listen. They're convinced they know who you are, and they're convinced that you that they know is what completes them. And then anything you do that interferes with that is seen as problematic behavior on your part. Why would you do that? Why are you doing this? We're meant to be together. And so that that gets very scary very, very fast when it's at the level of delusion. But although a lot of stalking relationships, the first date sometimes, there's a sense of, gee, there might be something here because the person is so attentive and so interested. You feel heard, you feel seen, but really you're being cataloged in relation to some imago that doesn't have anything to do with you. So that feeling will wear off quickly. But to go back to genre, and by the way, I printed a 17-page single-spaced lecture note to what I'm talking about tonight. So if I wander off a little bit, or I don't get to every point as thoroughly as I would like, the way this class works, you're going to listen to this, you're going to read that, you're going to listen to this, you're going to watch it happen one night, you're going to read that, you're going to listen to this, however much you want to go back and forth. But those are the three legs of the tripod. The open, and then as I said, I'll have the open classroom Monday nights, 7:30 to 9, and I'm running that sort of like a combination of a mass office hour and a radio show, a talk-in radio show. That's what it felt like when I had done it in A10 and in A11. Is people call in, they put something in the chat, or they say something out loud, and I don't have a lecture. I may have some comments that I thought about on the way over to my studio, so to speak, but not a formal lecture. I'll tape that too, so you'll be able to see it even if you can't attend in real time. But if you want to interact in real time, you'll have to be there. But you can listen to the tape of other people reacting with me in real time. And if you can't make it and you have a question that you're hoping I might address, even though you won't be able to see me do it live, send it to leonardgare@hotmail.com, and that'll be my mails, literally. And I can bring that up in the open classroom and say, and so I got an email from somebody and they were wondering about blah, blah, blah. And I can address that briefly, and then you can hear what other people have to say about it. The prompts, I'm putting them in the discussion section. So we're all going to be able to see what everybody writes. There's 67 of you guys, so it's big. It's not insane like A10, A11. I'm going into A11 now with 400 people, and I don't know how many people on the waiting list. What a waiting list means anymore, because A11, the 400 is set because of the fire code in the ARC, but we're not in the ARC. We're in the damn internet, where theoretically 1 million people could take the class. I just don't know what I would do about that. I suppose if they gave me an army of graders, then maybe it's all right. In any event, for those who are interested, I will also, not the open class, but this formal lecture, so to speak, as formal as I ever get, that I'm doing right now. I will put that on my YouTube channel. And I put all my A10 lectures on there this past semester. I just posted my first A11 lecture on Waiting for Godot. If you want to dip your toe into that and you haven't had A10 or A11, it's not a prerequisite. There's nothing there that I won't bring up here, but you could have a look at the very first lecture in A10 if you want, where I'm going to talk about the beginnings of modernity in some detail. And the reality is all my classes are extensions of all my other classes. If you want the full story of everything I have to say, you'll have to take all my classes. I've designed more than 20 classes that are currently on the books. I've taught all of them at one time or another, but we've hired a lot more people since then. And I designed this class, then Professor Flynn has taught it for quite a few years. But a lot of some of the deans, they were encouraging me to tape my lectures for these classes for posterity, or whatever that means. My legacy, Trump's working on his legacy and not doing very well at all. And this is going to be mine, and it doesn't involve, insurrection. So hopefully it's worth it. So that's one reason I've come back to teach this. I haven't taught this class in 10 years, maybe more. I've been teaching here something like 28 years. I've taught A10 or A11 27 or 8 years. This class I taught every year for about 5 or 6 years, and then haven't. So, but it's a little like riding a bicycle. I don't think I've forgotten by any means. And I've taught lots of cinema classes at B, C, and D level. I've taught the body in literature and film, more recently avant-garde, auteur theory, where I've featured the films of Alfred Hitchcock, topics in cinema, where I've done international film noir, international melodrama, still genres, but looking at Japanese and Asian and European and noting the varieties in the different cultures. But the great thing about genre is I like to compare it to geology, that geologists can look at rock formations and they can see the pressures that over the centuries that have gone into forming the earth. So there might, if they drill down a mile, I don't know if they'll go that far, but they can look at the strata and they can say, oh, this was the era of the dinosaurs where, things are really hot and there's lava and whatnot, and they can just take it on all the way up. So genres, in a way, are like cultural strata. There's pressures. Now the time frame is different. I mean, cinema's been around 120 years, which is a pretty long time in terms of cultural formation. It's nothing in terms of the formation of the earth, but there is a granularity to what we're going to be doing in here. So the romance, love in the 1930s, 1934, which is It Happened One Night, which is just about 1933, probably was the worst year of the Depression. I mean, it happened in 1929, and so everyone hears about that, but then they made a lot of mistakes, and it got worse and worse, and unemployment was 25% by 1933, and then it started to turn the corner. Not least of all because the world started arming itself, because Hitler was on the rise in the Weimar Republic, and he was rescuing the German economy by converting it into a war economy, and other countries were following suit. Not so ironically, the way we got out of the Depression was preparing for war, which hit in 1939 when Hitler invaded Poland. So romance in 1934 is changing from what it was in, say, 1890. Now we don't even have movies until 1895, so we don't have Hollywood romances from 1890. But culturally speaking, and roughly speaking, the big conversion that modernity is changing romance. It's changing marriage. It's changing family structure. It's changing how people meet. It's changing why they stay together. It's changing if and how often, how much more likely it is that they would get divorced. And you know that I'm just mentioning 4, and there's probably 50. So, and they're all related. We all know the divorce rate started climbing in the 20s and accelerated through the rest of the 20th century. And around 55% of marriages in North America, US, Canada at least, end in divorce. The divorce rate was way lower in the 20s. That doesn't necessarily mean that marriages were happier. It was just culturally much more frowned upon. Religion, the influence of religion has been waning since 1890, and that's profoundly affected romance. So that getting divorced is not necessarily a mortal sin for which you'll go to hell. You have sort of no fault divorce that came in the 60s and 70s, where neither party has to declare that the other person was, you know, a monster or an adulterer. They can just say irreconcilable differences, which means I don't want to be with you anymore. And then the real fight is about property and custody. So it's very easy to walk away from a marriage emotionally if you want. You do have to sort out the financial. Now it's much easier to walk away from a committed relationship where you're not married. So it's easier to walk away after 3 dates, obviously, than if you're living together. But until marriage, there's no legal, not even engagement, which is not contractual. Although typically the reason you give a diamond ring when you get engaged is it's as close as one can get to a contract without actually writing one, because the idea is if you just speak in heteronormative terms, just to make the point, but if the man gives the woman a ring, then breaks the engagement, it's perfectly legitimate for the woman to keep the ring. So that's also why the ring's supposed to be worth something, why they're supposed to be diamonds, so that there's a penalty for breaking the contract. Now, one of the biggest tensions in modern romance, we're going to see it at every turn, is the tension between money and love. On the one hand, we have the platitudes: you can't buy love. The best things in life are free. The Beatles did a cover of that song. Money can't buy everything, it's true, but what it can't buy, I can't use. Now that's an anti-romance song in a way. It's saying, and another famous anti-romance song is sung by Marilyn Monroe, and I put the clip in the lecture notes, that diamonds are a girl's best friend. And there's a line in there that if the office boss thinks you're nice, then get that ice, or else no dice. Almost kind of sounds like Beyonce. If you liked it, you should have put a ring on it. Too late. I'm dancing with all these other guys. You had a shot, and you wouldn't put down a deposit. So I'm in the free market. So on the one hand, romance operates in the free market like everything else. But the one thing that tries to be commercial free, like no one wants to marry for love or be married for love. We were very harsh on gold diggers of any sort. It's seen as a kind of desecration to marry someone just for their money. But even if you don't marry people, quote unquote, just for their money, marriage is both a financial and emotional commitment. Weddings, of course, go out of their way to not look commercial. So there's gifts, everything is paid for. No, you don't get a bill for your meal. There's a strenuous attempt to obscure as much as possible that this marriage is also going to entail financial commitment, because money and love are seen as antithetical, and that romance is the last remaining oasis into which capitalism has not encroached. That's the ideal. That the reality is, it doesn't mean you're not in love, but there's no such thing as a modern romance that has no connection to capitalism. You cannot live in capitalism and have any aspect of your relationships unaffected by it. It doesn't mean you're not in love or that someone else is not in love with you. And the reality is, when you get married, the money is hidden. And when you get divorced, there's nothing else. So when you meet your divorce lawyers, there's not going to be a cake. And when you get your cake, you're not going to have your lawyer be your best man. Although we do have things like prenuptial agreements, which make the case that I know I'm worth $10 million. I love you, but you're working, at the local bar, and if this doesn't work out, I'm not going to give you $5 million. I'll give you $10,000. So it's all, it's all laid down in the contract. The Kennedys used to have very complicated prenuptials where the woman was entitled to more of a fortune for every year she stayed in the marriage. So it was actually like she got a promotion, she got a bonus, and if she had a child, she got a bonus. It was all. I'm not saying none of the Kennedys ever were in love, but it was all contractualized. And give me just a sec. I got to turn this heat down in here. Okay, sorry. I pumped up the heat because it was cold, and now it isn't. So this tension between money and love will have different ways of manifesting itself. And the other basic tension is the relationship between romance and sexuality. Romance leads to sexuality, but sexuality isn't necessarily romantic. And I'm not even talking about non-consent. You can have, as you guys know, the so-called hookup culture, the Tinder culture. You can spend a night with someone, you're not in love when the night begins, you're not in love the next morning, and you can spend the night together. And no, I'm not judging that. I'm just pointing out that sex without romance is easy. Romance involves sex, but typically the way the romance is seen as contextualizing the sexuality, that I don't even know if people use this phrase anymore, making love as the sexual act. That was a term, specifically tempered to imply romance. So making love, as opposed to the 100 other, much cruder, more vivid phrases that we have for having sex. I'm not going to give you a list. You know a lot of them as well as I do, but a lot of them imply getting in and getting out, pardon the pun, without commitment. David Bowie's "Wham Bam, Thank You Ma'am" comes to mind as an expression in the so-called sexual revolution in the 60s, where there was an attempt to decouple romance and sex. Romance was seen as a way to use sex to tie someone to marriage, which was not a new idea. But the idea of the children in the 60s, the so-called flower children, the hippies, they'd seen the marriages of their parents in the 40s. And there was alcoholism, there was domestic abuse, there was divorce was either difficult or financially impossible. And they thought, well, why would you put yourself in this trap? You can love someone, have sex with someone. What's marriage, or as Tina Turner put it, what's love got to do with it? That song's ironic, of course, because she's kind of falling in love and she's singing it in an attempt to convince herself that she isn't. trying, in a way, that song is trying to reimpose the morality of the 60s of, if we feel like it, let's sleep together. What's love got to do with it? I mean, we have to probably like each other enough and be attracted enough to want to spend that time together. But other than that, what do we need? And there was a marriage bourgeois. It was nobody owned. It implied some kind of ownership. A lot of the old-fashioned wedding vows, really suggest that the father is handing over his daughter to her new owner. I mean, in the worst case of some of these vows, and now she has a new figure whom she should obey. So she should obey as a daughter. She should obey as a wife. The only transition is that this new man, of course, is not her father. So this is also for procreative purposes, for sexuality, for having children, which there's an incest taboo for a lot of reasons. Some people say, well, it's for biological reasons, and that's true. But most of the modern anthropologists have discovered that, the incest taboo is extreme. It has a strong social bearing. You cannot build community if you intermarry within a primary family structure. And the reason it's a taboo, and even against the law, is there's a concern that a possessive father might want to sort of keep the women. What if fathers wanted to keep the daughters to themselves? And I'm not suggesting that's some kind of cultural norm, but there is a real concern that women need to circulate. It's very patriarchal, but it was more obvious with the monarchies, where a king would have a daughter and another king would have a son, and these kids are a couple of weeks old and they're engaged. Not in any literal physical sense, but it's like we need a political connection so that we don't go to war. So our children are going to get married. So our kingdoms, their children are going to be princes and princesses of two kingdoms. So interfamilial marriage is an idea that would also destroy civilization and culture, and not just restrict the gene pool, which is the sort of Darwinian explanation. So we're going to be watching 4 romances, and I'm deliberately spacing in every case, in every genre that we're looking at. I'm spacing them out by quite a few years. So we'll go from 1934, It Happened One Night, to The Graduate, 1968, to Pretty Woman, 1991, I think, to Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which I'm guessing, again, I have to look at these years, maybe 2004 or something like that. So all 4 of these, I'll be able to certainly demonstrate, are contained by the genre of romance. The content varies quite a bit, but what the genres tend to do is they tend to try and retweak something that we might think of as eternal and naturalized: love, science in the case of science fiction, and fear in the case of horror. But feelings are historical. Fear in the 20th century is not evoked by the same things as fear in the 16th or the 15th or the 12th. Most fear-based reactions before the 19th century were religious-based. Am I saved? Am I damned? Did I sin? Am I going to hell? Is God offended? These were the sources of fear, which is why the dominant place you still find religious overtones is horror. The Exorcist, all the ghosts and all the potential of an angry God, it's all in our horror movies. It's still right in our face, but we tend to think of ourselves as a resolutely secular age, but our horror movies are carrying the load of all the denied theologies that seem to break out. Rosemary's Baby would be another example of, where Satan has a child, wants to have a child with a woman, Mia Farrow in this case. So we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to horror. But so let me back up now and make some points about the 3 genres: cinematic genre, modernity, and this construction of the self. One of the reasons cinema is the dominant art form of our time is that the way you put together a movie so that it makes sense is a lot like the way we put together our experiences so that we make sense. We edit. When you go through your day, there are experiences that affect you and you remember, and there are ones that you don't. And unless maybe somebody reminds you, why do you remember what you remember at the end of the day? Because somebody else could live through your day and they wouldn't remember things the same or in the same way. So we start to layer our self-construction partly so that we can manage the influx of stimuli, especially in modernity. The amount of attraction and distraction and stimuli in modernity is, especially in the urban cities, and most Hollywood romances are affiliated with cities. If they do go on the road, and it happened one night, a rich heiress who has married on the spot, hasn't consummated it yet. That's important in 1934 because her father whisked her away and brought her out in his luxury yacht. So she couldn't consummate the marriage, and now he's trying to get it annulled because the guy's a gold digger. She's furious mostly because she's trying to show independence from the father. It's not clear. She doesn't think this guy's the greatest thing in the world. She's just tired of being under the rule of her father. So she will dive off the boat and start heading on a bus trip to New York to get back with her husband. She knows once it's consummated, once they've had sex, the father's hold is kind of broken. He won't want to pursue the divorce because she's not a virgin anymore. She could be pregnant now, and that would be a scandal for the rest of her life. So if she gets this marriage consummated, the father will be defeated, if you want to put it that way. But we also have a feeling the father's right. So this is where the tension comes in. This guy is a jerk. So we can sympathize with both of them. I mean, they're both stubborn. They love each other a lot, obviously, the father and the daughter. And the father's way overprotective. And it's causing his daughter to be really reckless about how she wants to get away. And clearly, both of them have some work to do if this relationship's going to be made better. So she doesn't run off and marry a jerk, or is that he doesn't break her spirit by being so afraid of her being hurt that he doesn't let her go out and experience anything. So that this romance will be taken out on the road because she will bump into a reporter who's just been fired, and he's a salt of the earth type, and they'll hate each other. He sees her as a phony, spoiled brat, and she sees him as uncouth and brash and a braggart. And this is what I call the ideology of the chance encounter in Hollywood romance. It's a central trope where because how do you meet people in a modern city? It's not what it was in the 1890s. The parents aren't chaperoning. You don't have this. You used to have to ask the father if you could have permission to court the daughter. Going back to the 1890s, you would. So when you wanted to ask a girl out, you'd ask the father if it would be okay to ask the girl out, and then you had to get approval to even go on a date, and you certainly had to ask the father before you asked the daughter to marry you. Have you asked my father? And you can see this in some movies that are deliberately cast into earlier times. But so there's a lot more control over, first of all, who you dated at all, and that's all kind of gone in the modern romance. Men and women are in the workplace together. They're everywhere together, and the parents aren't there every second. And even if the parents do try to exert control, it's not all that hard to date on your own time and not run it through the parental grid work, and that even can be a bit of tension in some of these movies. So what that also means then is, clearly there are problems with having virtually arranged marriages, but there's also problems with having free love. It's not like one system's perfect and the other isn't. There is a 55% divorce rate. So you bump into people all day long. Who do you want to meet? Who do you want to exchange glances with? Who do you want to have a conversation with? And we all have a lot of built-in restrictions. What's the difference between talking and flirting, for instance? That would be a good free write and a good prompt, because flirting is obviously talking, but talking isn't necessarily flirting. So what to occur when you're talking to describe it as flirting. And this is really gets into whether the tone of the meeting. So if there's some kind of interest on one, even just one side or the other, flirting is a kind of call and response where you might say something and smile or give a little laugh. Later, it might be go all the way to a double entendre, but that's pretty uncouth to open with that stuff. That usually comes off as a big turnoff. If you're flirting really means implying that you want to have sex because you just met, that could work on Tinder, I guess, but it's not a prelude to romance, since romance involves so much more emotion and spirituality and sexuality, but all three, not just one of them. So there's different kinds of flirting too. Flirting is also a way to indicate you're interested without admitting that you're interested. You maintain plausible deniability. So the other person thinks that you're saying that you want to be asked out, and they're like, "Ha, you're so hard up. I guess you want to go out with me." And if they're that big a jerk, you can say, "What gave you that idea?" And the flirting is vague enough so that they can't really pin you down. You didn't say, "I'm dying to go out with you." You just smiled, or you looked away, or you looked up, or you looked down, and then it's over. There's no date. So flirting is a way to, we have the phrase falling in love, and falling is a kind of scary thing. Flirting is trying to take the elevator into love. You go slowly. You got one on the exit. You've got one foot out the door. Both people do typically. And sometimes both people bolt, and sometimes one does and the other doesn't. And sometimes neither does, but one wants to. I mean, the variabilities are endless. But flirting is a special radio wavelength where you allow the potentiality of romance to be broadcast, but not any content, just the possibility. You tune in the station, but you haven't committed to whatever comes through the broadcast. Whereas it's easy to, if somebody flirts with you and you're not interested, you just don't flirt back. And that, in a way, it's a relatively civil way to spare feelings, if you will. It's flirting, sort of feeling a little flirtatious with someone and realizing that they're still being quite businesslike or quite matter of fact. Is if you're sensitive enough to take a hint, you don't have to lose face. As the Japanese might say, you just let it go back to a business-like exchange, and no foul. Some people can be obtuse and not get the signals that this other person is not opening the broadcast band for flirtation. Then it gets even more complicated than that, because is someone playing quote unquote hard to get? Is it the case that, yeah, they are interested and you gave up way too soon? They didn't say stop. They said not so fast. I mean, that can be embedded in, but that's a really tricky one. Like it's not that I'm not interested, it's that you're coming on too strong. So let's back it up. I need space. I need a 7-second time delay here, just to think about how I feel about what you're saying, instead of rushing to the next level of engagement. So you can look at the history of flirting in these movies, and in some ways the flirting in It Happened One Night comes across as having much more sexual tension than certainly the flirtation in Pretty Woman or It Happened One Night. I mean, in Pretty Woman, after all, she's a prostitute. She's already bought and paid for. What kind of flirtation is that? It's a very strange flirtation, because the sex is already done, and it's commercial. It's fully commercial, and there's no romance. And it says to her, what do you do? And she says, anything except I don't kiss on the mouth. And this very cold financial guy, Richard Gere, says, neither do I. And so right there, what they have in common is established. They're both phobic about actual feelings for other people, because both their jobs require using people. He's a venture capitalist who buys companies, breaks them down, throws everybody out onto unemployment, and reconstructs it in a hugely profitable way for him, which can decimate the community. She has to maintain distance from clients. She has to make sure that it feels like a job. And there's a lot of talk from among her friends. Don't ever get involved. Don't ever feel anything for a client. So don't kiss on the mouth. So in a 1930s romance, one of the things that indicates people are falling in love is they're getting more and more attracted to the idea of being sexual with one another. But since that can't take place before marriage, the sexual tension drives the relationship forward. So the flirtation in a 1934 movie, It Happened One Night, is much more sexually charged than in any other movie we're going to see, because by the time of The Graduate, 1968, we're several years into the sexual revolution. And what has changed? One thing that's changed, which is quite practical, is that they've introduced the pill, the contraceptive pill for a woman, which is something like 97% effective. So the whole issue of fumbling around with condoms or not is eliminated. There was no AIDS, or even the thought of AIDS. STDs were still could occur, but they were easily cured with penicillin, which didn't mean everyone was running around having sex with everybody. But syphilis was incurable until penicillin in 1940. Gonorrhea was incurable, and syphilis would take 30 years to kill you, but it was kind of the AIDS of the turn of the century. It would eventually get into spinal fluid and then to the brain, and that's when people would become insane from syphilis. So there were things, not unlike AIDS, but by 1968, you had a cure for every known STD. AIDS wasn't here. And you had a contraception that was 98% effective. It changed everything. It changed even something as simple as the woman saying, I don't want to do this until I get married because I don't want to get pregnant and be unmarried. And really the man had little argument against that. If he did moan and say, well, if you love me, you do it, and blah, blah, blah. In a way, the 60s was, it was difficult because there was no built-in excuse. I mean, the choice was still there. I'm not gonna have sex until I get married. But you couldn't say, I would, except I'm worried about pregnancy, or I would, but I'm worried about AIDS. Now the only reason to not have sex before you got married is you don't want to, and that can go one of two ways. Then suddenly in the 50s, women, especially in the 50s and even more in the 60s, that's when you begin to hear all this stuff about if I don't let him, some other woman will. On the other hand, you also hear if I'm sexual with him, too soon, I'm going to be one of the women that he plays with, not one of the women that he marries. So how do you toe that line? And this is where women were particularly caught in what Freud had called the Madonna whore complex, that men wanted women who were Madonnas and men wanted women who were whores, but they didn't want it to be the same woman. So they wanted someone like their mother, and then they wanted someone who was purely sexual, and somewhere in between those two, in some kind of unacknowledged balance, there would be a wife. Somehow she was supposed to be sexual. How are they going to have children if she isn't? But at the same time, it was a maternal role. She was going to be a mother, therefore, how much like his mother. And women had the same, well, not the same. They were looking for father figures, or described as that. But this is because this man you're marrying, it will be the father of your children. So should he be or not be like your father? And this is where a lot of projection comes in. And this is why the Hollywood romance as a genre is so important, because it keeps saying, don't worry, this can be worked out. As the Beatles would have said, you gotta work it out. And there's a lot of love songs about that, like don't give up, we can do this. So in The Graduate, what happens is the sexuality gets foregrounded in the most animalistic way, well, not the most animalistic, but Benjamin, the graduate, just graduated, gets seduced by the woman next door. His father and this other father are in a law firm together, and so the other guy's wife seduces Benjamin, and it's pretty, it's clearly pleasurable in a kind of basic carnal way. And then when he kind of naively tries to start treating it like a relationship, her incredible disinterest, if not contempt, comes out. And I don't want to give too many spoilers, but so what the movie kind of establishes is that you can have sex without romance. But then what happens when you want to have romance? Can you convert a relationship that was based on just wanting sex to wanting more, as we like to say? I'd like more, I need more. And that happens in Pretty Woman, where ironically, the way he gives her back her self-esteem somehow, by the way he seems to treat her, makes her think enough of herself that when he offers to set her up in an apartment as his new mistress, she says, I would have said yes in a second if you'd asked me that when we first met. But now, because of you, because of how you made me feel, I value myself more, and I don't want to do that. And initially we'll say, I don't know how to do any more than that. And she says, well, I know, I understand. And she kisses him goodbye and sort of like, you helped me. I'm sorry, I'm sad, but I'm a better person than before we met. So we'll talk about all this stuff in more detail, but I'm just trying to show you why it's so interesting that The Graduate is still a Hollywood romance, but it's a Hollywood romance where he's having sex with a woman, and then later he's going to fall in love with that woman's daughter. Now, how is that going to work out? And that's the famous Mrs. Robinson, who becomes savage when she realizes that he's fallen in love with her daughter. Anyway, An Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is really a postmodern Hollywood romance, but it still is a Hollywood romance. It's more candid about, and most of you guys, I think you know the hook. It's kind of this tawdry sci-fi hook that it's now possible to go to a cheap little place that looks a lot like a dentist's office and have specific memories wiped out. So there are people sitting there with the leash of their dead dog, and they're so sad that their dog is dead. They want to have a treatment where they will forget they ever had the dog. And the same thing with relationships. People who are in a breakup that is so painful that they have this very, very specific neural operation where they don't remember that they're ever having the relationship. So I'll give you that much. In some ways, it's an attempt of science to cure the broken heart. It goes very badly wrong, and that's the point. That, as Alexander Pope says, better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. And by which he doesn't mean that love won't hurt when it goes badly, but why would you avoid it for that reason? What else is life but the kind of the joy of being in love and the heartache of not? So avoiding the heartache by not having the joy is a bad idea, but it doesn't make the heartache any easier. But wiping out the memory that you'd ever knew someone, because it hurts now that you're broken up, it's very hard to do that without damaging a lot more. So the study of Hollywood genres and how they began and how they sustain themselves over time and how they've mutated, which is really what I'm describing. The Hollywood romance remains the same organism. The genre remains the same organism, but it mutates. It's almost like a virus where it changes form from what it already is. It doesn't change it to something else. It alters an aspect of itself in order to achieve a new capability. So in 1934, what's needed is what I'm going to be calling the companionate marriage, where it's not enough to be in love, it's not enough to be sexually attractive. You need to be partners now. I mean, nowadays we talk all the time about this is my partner. That's new. That's only about 10, we used to call them significant others, fiance, my beau, my boo, or whatever, that was a thing for a while. But partner is a fairly, It's a fairly business-like way to put it. The implication is you're romantic and sexual, but the board itself is not particularly romantic or sexual. So it's useful in a workplace environment. Can you work on Tuesday night? Oh no, I'm sorry, I can't. It's my partner's birthday. And you just have to say that. And it also helps with the sexual orientation. You don't have to say my boyfriend, my girlfriend. You don't have to identify your orientation. It's your partner. So in a lot of ways that works, but that really was happening in the era of the Depression. In the earlier centuries, men and women who were married weren't supposed to be partners. They were supposed to have completely separate spheres. I mean, they came together for procreation, but they weren't trying to pay the mortgage together, or at least that wasn't the implication. There was a sense that the woman would stay home, the man would earn the living. Both were supposed to be seen as equal contributions, although in practice there was always this implication or even explicit statement that what the man did was more important. Bringing home money was more important. Financially speaking, it wasn't more important. And we know now with the issues around childcare that men wouldn't have been able to work the way they did if they didn't have a wife who raised the children. So unpaid labor is still labor, and so but it was easy to act like I earned the money. This is all my money, and I'm choosing to share it with you. So you need to do something for it. Well, she's already done something for it. She's kept the house. She's cared for the children. It's not all your money. It's half yours. And a lot of divorce law now just makes that matter of fact. I mean, in Canada, once you've lived together in a home for a year, it's not even up for discussion. That house is 50-50. It doesn't matter if the guy made $5 million and paid for the house and the woman stayed home. The asset is split. You don't even have to fight about it in court. And there's a way that feels right. Otherwise, the patriarchy, keeps all the money, and the divorce is almost unthinkable for the woman because she literally can't afford it if she's left with nothing. So that's what we're going to be doing the next 4 times out. But let me go through a couple of I'm just going to read briefly from some of my notes to make sure that I've centered your focus a little bit. So Hollywood genres are to cultural historians what rock formations are to geologists. They trace events, geologists, over millions of years by looking at the shifting layers of sediment and rock. Cinema has been around 120, so we look at a much thinner slice of time in a much more granular way. So what are the activities and processes through which human societies produce systems of value and meaning? So genre charts the activity and the process of producing value and meaning. And romance and love is one of the most valuable and one of the most meaningful constructs in modern culture. As Matthew Arnold famously in Dover Beach turns to the woman after he's had an existential crisis. Ah, love, let us be true to one another. That's the beginning of modern romance, virtually that poem, turning away from God and the death of God and the dread of a meaningless universe to the person who's standing next to you and says, this is it. All you need is love. I can almost piece together the lectures with love songs. That one by John Lennon. And also Can't Buy Me Love by the Beatles. And so that's what we're going to be doing. And also the system, the activities and the processes through which we explain and interpret the events and experiences of our life. Because that's what makes an event is not memorable to you, explain and interpret. If you don't do either of those things with an event, the event doesn't leave a trace. It's when you're moved to explain and interpret to yourself, to someone else, to the person who's there, even if it's something like, excuse me, you're standing on my foot, and they're like, oh, I'm sorry. You're going to remember that at the end of the day, because you had to explain and interpret for somebody. My foot, you're on it, please. And hopefully it goes well, and they're like, fine. And they're not jerks about it or become an even more memorable event. like road rage can take an event that would have been fairly low key, like, hey, watch where you're going, and then the guy, pops out of the car, slams the door, and says, let's go, let's get out of the car, and let's fight. Now it's going to be a huge event, and because more and more of who you are is being enlisted, for better or for worse, by the encounter. So one of the things couples love to do when you meet or when you meet other couples, one of the stories couples like to exchange is, how did you guys meet? And sometimes tends to get, obviously it's not that interesting if you met yesterday at Starbucks. I mean, what does that even mean? Met you had coffee together. But if you've been together 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, the fact that, oh, I missed my bus. And if I had not missed my bus, we never would have met. And now we've had 4 children. We've been married for 40 years. So there's a fascination with the first time you meet. And I call this the ideology of the chance encounter. And that is, we build up we have to make, as a relationship gets more romantic, enters into marriage, parenting, we need to make the moment that we met more and more fortuitous. Especially if you're looking for true love, in the sense of, do you believe there's one and only one person out there for you? People have points of view about that. Do you believe in love at first sight? And people may say that and then divorce the person that they loved at first sight. So does that mean they didn't? Not necessarily. It means that they had to look at them more than once. It didn't necessarily hold. But so the ideology of the chance encounter in modernity is even more important, because you're meeting people randomly, so randomly. Remember, I said before, families were consulted, fathers were asked. A lot went into it before you were allowed to court. Now there's nothing except the flirtation. You can meet someone you're going to wind up spending 50 years on the subway. You can bump into them at the grocery store. There's no history to it. There's no ritual. There's nothing contextualizing that moment that makes it special, except that it was the beginning of something that became special. So what do we do with that? We don't really like to keep it random. Like, I could have bumped into someone else at the grocery store and married them. It would have been just the same thing. I mean, we want the chance encounter of our long-term partner to have some quality of uniqueness, even if we have to retrospectively infuse it with the uniqueness. And we love to go on and go over all the things that could have happened for the meeting not to have happened. I wasn't supposed to be there. I was supposed to be somewhere else. I was going to, there's 100 different ways. A possible prompt in the future might be but I don't know if I don't know if it'll work. I have to be tricky. I was thinking, tell you guys, write the first time you met some person. But I don't know how long you've been with anybody, or even if you are with anybody. So I don't think that question would work. It would work better for people in my age bracket. Anyway, that was just an aside. So the activities and processes by which, and these are all in the notes, we produce systems of value and meaning. We produce ways to explain and interpret. How does one meaning rather than another develop over space and time? And the activities of symbol making, interpretation, imaginative projection continuously interlock over space and time with with political and material processes. We fall in love during a political era. What does it mean to fall in love in the Trump era? It's not the same as the Eisenhower era for any number of reasons. So ideology, myth, genre, and history all combined. If I were to do one of my famous Venn diagrams, and maybe I can try and do one and hold it up to the camera, since I don't have anything like a blackboard. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So ideology, genre, myth, history. So this is what the overlapping domains look like. And at the very, very center the one part of the Venn diagram where all four of these things overlap, that's where you would want to put self. Because that's how you experience yourself in relation to your larger context. So each genre has a different way of prioritizing what makes life the most worth living. Obviously, for romance, the answer is love. For science fiction, it's progress via technology toward something better, which usually winds up being dystopic. We'll get to that, Blade Runner and so on. The Matrix. And for the Western, what makes life worth living is honor, loyalty, integrity, principles, the cowboy, who may not actually exist inside the law, but he exists inside a code. And it's typically identified as masculine genres. So genres get genderfied. Romance is seen as feminine. Westerns are seen as masculine, but that says a lot more about how they each teach the performance of femininity and the performance of masculinity. There is romance in a Western. It's just not the primary priority. In fact, most Westerns have a scene where the guy's got to go meet the nasty, dirty gunfighter and quite possibly be killed. And the woman he loves says, "Don't go." And he says, "I have to go, or I'm not a man. I have to go, or I'm not the man you love." And she says, "I don't want you to do this. And if you do this, I won't be here when you get back." And he does it. And of course, she is there when he gets back. And this is that debate. I got to be a man first, and then I'll love you. If I'm not a man first, I'm not worth loving, and I don't have what it takes to love you the way you deserve. So I have to go out and risk my life on principle. So that's a scene in so many Westerns. High Noon is probably the best example of it. Gary Cooper is leaving town with Grace Kelly when the brothers that he threw into jail are coming back to ransack the town, and he's no longer the marshal. And so his wife of less than a day is saying, "Just keep going." He says, "If I start running now, I'll never stop." So he turns the carriage around and takes his new bride back into town, where the rest of the townspeople are so scared of these Trump-like outlaws who are coming that they want to just capitulate to the outlaws and hope that the outlaws are nice to them. This is happening right now in American politics, and placating a bully and possibly a madman. Certainly a pathological narcissist who scares them. He's such a bully that they would rather lie down and hope that they're not treated too badly, which means that Gary Cooper is alone and has to face this gang of killers without the help of the townspeople. They're going to be hiding under their beds until he's dead. That, by the way, is the next genre class, but it's hard to not jump around to help you see. So one of the things that distinguishes one genre from another genre is how they prioritize. It's not that there's no romance in a Western. It's just that it's second tier, possibly third tier. Romance is really low down the ladder in science fiction. And you might say, well, what about Princess Leia? But Star Wars is a Western. It's not science fiction. Darth Vader is a gunslinger. The duels with the lightsabers might as well be shootouts on the street, because the whole point of a lightsaber is that it reintroduces skill into combat in an era where we've had machine guns and atomic bombs, and there's no way. And in fact, Star Wars looks ridiculous. Like, who brings a lightsaber when stormtroopers seem to have automatic weapons? But if you have faith, your lightsaber works. If you have skill, your lightsaber works. And the Force will be with you, not being forceful, but having a force. So being in the right, having principles. So it's the priorities. For melodrama, it's the family, not the romance, not the marriage, not the sex, but the result of all that, the family. So melodramas tend to begin when a loving, committed couple have children. Romances end when a loving, committed couple are on their way to having children, and that's not a coincidence, because romance is privileged love as the proof against all misery, and melodramas features family, so that even if the romance is only mediocre, it's not the top priority. Take care of the family. You'll get what you need from taking care of your family. So any woman who runs off from her family because she's bored, of course, is the villain in a melodrama, or any man who becomes a workaholic or has an affair, like Fatal Attraction, with Michael Douglas and Glenn Close, nearly destroys literally his whole family because he has a weekend fling while his wife is away, and it turns out he does this with the pathological narcissist. Not a good idea. So I'm conscious of the time, so I'm gonna, and this is, as I said, is all in the notes, so I'm just trying to embroider it. So ideology is the basic system of concepts, beliefs, and values that define a society's way of interpreting its place in the cosmos. So the book of Genesis it's a sacred scripture, but it also works like ideology. And Eve ate the apple God said not to. She gets Adam to eat it too, and they get kicked out of the Garden of Eden. This explains our place in the cosmos. We're in a fallen world. We were kicked out of paradise. We can get back to something like paradise if we live according to God's rule, but we failed the first test. So that's the way ideology works. It's a story that exists outside of interpretation and time, and it allows us to set up, to use it as a moral compass. And so it's important. Ideology is often a story, but stories are not all stories are ideology. In order for a story to be ideology, it has to seem to exist outside of space and time, and which is going to be very similar to a myth, but not identical. So to give an example from today's headlines, various American politicians are saying, in relation to the storming of the Capitol, this is not who we are, in reference to the riot. But rioters carrying the Confederate flag were saying this is who we are. And they are saying, what are we supposed to do? Which is what one of the people said, an actual quote from one of the rioters. And they're also saying, we are rioting because you are stealing the election, stealing the country, stealing the ideologies by which we make sense of the world and ourselves. So people who feel their ideologies are about to be annihilated are capable of vandalism, arson, even murder. In their own minds, it is justified because an attack on one's ideology feels murderous. And the rioters are not wrong when they say their values of white being superior to black are being challenged, because they are. And so immediately after the phrase Black Lives Matter became a slogan, their response was all lives matter, by which they meant white lives matter more. Many of the rioters are unemployed, disenfranchised, cut off from any avenue to the so-called American dream. The only thing they have left is a sense of being innately superior because they are, quote unquote, white. So Make America Great Again was, right from the start, a dog whistle to those who believed the country was settled by white Christians, and it is their country. Others are merely tolerated if they know their place, and immigrants are barred or walled out. This comment would literally not make any sense. No one has invaded America. It did not hook up to an already existing ideology that America is a white Christian country. The police are there to keep Black Americans in their place, and that a wall must be built to keep people out. And Trump's script for the stolen election was that non-whites had stolen the election. Therefore, the country had been stolen, and whites needed to resort to violence to get it back, as they traditionally have. And let's not forget the irony that America itself is by and large predicated on land stolen from natives. They might be able to make a case that their country was stolen. Africans who came over as slaves were stolen from their own country. So the stealing has all been by white European settlers. How is the reverse of this fact, given mythological status, converted into the myth that whites settled the land and earned the right to own it only for themselves? Well, of the thousands of westerns that have been made, how many featured an African-American cowboy, or even in a subordinate role? If you saw Stagecoach, viewing I did with some of you, how many featured natives as nothing except bloodthirsty savages, incomprehensible and evil? So related to this, the rioting crowd was in fact nearly 100% white, and predominantly from the South. The handful of minority figures Trump had planted behind him at his rallies and literally hired them to be there were nowhere to be seen in this riot. A gallows with a noose was erected in sight of the Capitol, a reminder of Jim Crow laws, and of the Ku Klux Klan, who covered their faces and terrorized African Americans and their families if they were judged insufficiently subservient to white rule, which of course they have. So nothing that we saw on Wednesday got created. It just had a chance to emerge. And that's where so there are numerous competing ideologies. The rioters is also what America is. So to say this is not who we are that's just one dominant ideology pushing back against what has till now been a subservient ideology. Since the Civil War, the attitude we saw on display on Wednesday, well, it's been promoted for 4 years throughout the Trump era. It's how he got elected. Trump got elected by appealing to a subordinate ideology that everyone pretended was extinct. He knew it wasn't. Really, anyone who paid any attention knew it wasn't, but it hadn't been activated. It's kind of like a horror movie where the bolt of lightning wakes up the monster. Trump just tapped into the pre-Confederate ideology of what America was supposed to become: dominant white people with slaves and a Christian right to slaves and land. That's America too. It's not the America I grew up in America until I was 30. It's not America I want to live in, or even, and certainly not an America I want to praise. But it is one of several Americas, and we'll see what happens in the next as to just how much more might emerge. The other way this, even just today, this came out is that there were DC Capitol Police among the rioters showing badges to their colleagues of the DC Capitol Police, and that's one reason the place was breached so effortlessly. Is that many people in the rioters are police. They are security guards. They are the people who've been hired to defend democracy. It's just that they're convinced that now defending democracy requires one to invade the Capitol, because the people in the Capitol are not democratic. This is the ideology that they've stolen an election. Therefore, the real defenders of democracy now are outside of Congress, and the word patriotic is suddenly being used all over the place because they've turned it around. It's their patriotic duty to storm the Capitol because they are the patriots, and the people in Congress are the traitors. So ideology works with binaries, and you'll notice people go back and forth: who's a patriot, who's a traitor. It depends on which ideology. If you're looking at the dominant ideology of how America likes to think of itself, then the people storming the Capitol are traitors. If you think of it as the founding fathers who were willing to say all men are created equal, even as they made institutionalized slavery, then the traitors are in Congress. So they're either in Congress or they're storming the gates of Congress. It's either a revolution or an insurrection. So anyway, I couldn't help but use the headlines to talk about ideology. So there's more in my notes, but I'm not going to hold you here looking through all that. So a genre, just to get these terms in your head, is an expressive form, like the sermon or the manifesto, and it provides a way of articulating ideology. So genre is the form through which ideology is communicated. So the ideology in the Matrix, that we've been enslaved by machines, is within the form of science fiction. So you can think of other genres. Wedding vows are a genre. Oaths of office, depositions, affidavits. These are all the forms, contracts by which ideological content is enshrined, embedded, communicated. So many people write their own wedding vows now, but the genre of a wedding vow is the same. So you may not repeat a wedding vow that everyone else has said, but if you write your own vow, it's still a wedding vow. That's an example of how a genre can continue to contain new content. People didn't write their own vows 20 years ago, as a rule. There was a standard, till death do us part, and for better, and I don't know what it is. I wrote my own vows, but a lot of it was patriarchal. the sacrifice of the woman was highlighted and given over to the man because of his position as the new protector, husband. The word husband actually means to conserve resources. In that case, the resource is the wife and her reproductive capacity. So she's husbanded, but it's also a term people sometimes use to manage livestock. Now, I'm okay with the word husband. I get called a husband by my wife, but I'm not unaware of its original source. It doesn't make it a sexist term innately, but it shows the history of the sexism if you take it back to its origin. So a genre is different from a ritual in that genres provide templates for words, narratives, stories, and rituals do something similar, but for actions that are repeated in a recognizable way. So a gunfight in a Western is a ritual contained within the genre of the Western. So you'll have time to think about this. We're going to be talking about it for 12 weeks, so don't fall over chasing your tail here. You can take your time. And finally, myth, and I'm going to kind of try and conclude my verbal part of this. So myth are the assumptions, that's an important word, of value that are inherent in a culture's ideology, and they're tacitly accepted as being given, such as the document, Declaration of Independence, saying it is self-evident that all men are created equal, even when the country has been founded on the genocide of Native and the enslavement of the Africans. So the ideology has a lot of work to do to keep contradictions and paradoxes away from assumptions. So myth's a special kind of narrative in the sense that the meaning is expressed symbolically and with a gesture toward eternity in the cosmos. This part, not the clock. So, for example, Adam and Eve ate the forbidden fruit. I gave that example, so you can read that later. So there are various genres of mythic expression. Romance promulgates myths about love, melodrama about family, horror about judgment and the unknown, science fiction about the direction in which we're heading. Myths can be seen as stories, but they are stories drawn from a society's history that have acquired through persistent usage a power of symbolizing. Myths become powerful because they're repeated so often no one knows where they're from anymore. And a lot of you know about my Pepsi myths in modernity: progress, efficiency, perfection, satisfaction, innovation. It's in any ad you can find anywhere. Those are the myths of modernity. The Greeks had different myths, and they too organized their experience according to the myths that we now find to be fascinating stories, but we don't think the sun is dragged across the sky in a cart by Apollo. So in this way, a mythic story serves as a process of both personal and social remembering. It's a way for the culture to remember, and therefore a way for people to learn the embedded cultural memories of a culture in which they are living. So here are some bullet points. I'm going to end with this about what love is in modernity, and how Hollywood romance is a genre that calls on myths to generate ideologies about what love is in modernity and how it can be recognized. So there are myriad possible human relationships. Only one is constituted as romantic. So what is unique about a relationship deemed romantic? And a distinguishing feature of the romantic relationship is that it forms a couple for the foreseeable future, often sanctioned as the married couple. Although romance includes a sexual relationship, it is only one component. It is possible, even maybe easier, to have a sexual relationship that is not romantic, or a friendship that is not romantic, or even have a distaste for someone that you can't avoid. All these are decidedly not romantic, and they're easier than being romantic because there's less emerging. The other ones are about setting boundaries. Romance is about removing boundaries, like that recent love song, "All of Me Loves All of You." I think it's John Legend, maybe. And yet, one of the tropes of Hollywood romance is using something to make a statement about something else. So in one of the things we'll see in romance, Hollywood romance, is one of the ways that to express that being romantically involved is making you more confident as you go shopping. The shopping scene in Pretty Woman is kind of legendary, where the Roy Orbison song is playing in the background and she's marching, and she has a good shopping trip and she has a bad shopping trip. The bad shopping trip is when she doesn't have confidence, she doesn't have a sense of being loved, and the good shopping trip is when she feels loved and seen and cared for. And that's how we're shown that love has happened. Let's see. So okay, there's a few other smaller points. These other points are longer, so I'm going to skip that. And just to end on this one note that that romance is supposed to be a commercial-free zone. It's one of the things that the romance has to work the most to keep out, because there is a very standard concept of you can use love in film noir, which we'll get into in the class. You have femme fatales who pretend to be in love so they can destroy people and get their way. Okay, I'm going to halt there because I could go on, and I'm tired, and you probably are too. So I'm going to stop the recording. I won't be here. I will be here in the open classroom 7:30 to 8:30 or 9 next Monday. That's when because normally our so-called synchronous class was to be 7 to 10. So I assume you know that time frame open. I will tape it if you can't make it. I probably will have posted lecture 2 by then, and try and have viewed It Happened One Night, because we may also look at some clips both in my lecture and in the classroom itself. So questions to leonardgary@hotmail.com, and have a good week, and I will see you literally in a week, or perhaps on tape again before then. Okay.